Hi everyone. I want to begin by thanking Winnie, not just for the panel, but for everything she's done in creating and Clear Lines and keeping it going. Like as she said, it's a completely volunteer-led organisation, hence the donation box, which you maybe saw on your way in and will still be there on your way out. So none of the ticket sales from tonight are going to Clear Lines. So if you can give anything to make more things like this happen, that would be really amazing. Okay, good. I was told to do that now. I'm done. I'm excited to introduce our panel, so I will do that. So on my left, let's do the thing there. On my left is Claire Best, who is an award-winning poet and writer who often collaborates with artists. She has performed to autobiographical poetry and photography project Self-Portrait Without Breasts across the UK and Ireland and in the USA and Canada. The Missing List, which is the book we're here with this evening. Her prose memoir addressing the effects of sexual abuse as a young child by her father was in the final 3 of the MS Lexia Memoir Competition 2015. And Claire has been a fine bookbinder, a bookseller, an editor, and teaches creative writing at the Open University. On my immediate right is Madeline Black. So the sharing of Madeline's story publicly on the Forgiveness Project's website in September 2014 opened lots of doors for her in ways that she'd never imagined, and many women and men got in contact and explained how reading her story gave them strength, hope, a different perspective of what's possible in their lives. The founder of the Forgiveness Project, Marina, often refers to the various people on her website as story healers rather than storytellers, which I think is a really beautiful phrase. And now Madeline completely understands why. She's taken part in both TV and radio interviews and has been invited to share her story of being gang raped as a teenager at conferences, events, and schools. She recognises that she was the victim of a crime that left her silent for many years, but now has found her voice and intends to use it not just for her, but for so many who can't find theirs just yet. And her memoir, Unbroken, was published on April 4th, 2017. And finally, we have Louise Beach. So Louise has been writing since she could physically hold a pen. It's her safe place, where she escapes and finds therapy and joy. But it took 10 years, 4 novels and a few tears to finally get the Dream 4 book deal. Louise's debut, How to Be Brave, was published in 2015. It was a Guardian reader's pick. The Mountain in My Shoes followed, and then Maria in the Moon, which is the book we're here with this evening, which the Sunday Mirror called quirky, darkly comic, and heartfelt. And The Lion Tamer Who Lost is now out and is a love reading style book. So thank you, and you have amazing titles as well. The Maria in the Moon is amazing, but your titles are like ace. So Claire, I was wondering if you could kick us off with a reading from The Missing List, if that's right.
Sure. Shall I say a few words about the book itself
yes,
before?
Please do.
Yeah.
I forgot that sheet.
But just because I've been rehearsing it, you know. The Missing List took me 15 years to write. Actually, it's taken me my whole life to write it, because I was abused from the age of 7, and I decided about the same age, I announced to my mother I wanted to be a writer. So there was some link there already, I think. The Missing List took so long partly because it's written in patches, and it includes many different kinds of writing. Also, my father's voice. So there's a kind of interesting thing here going on about trying to include the perpetrator, I think, in the work. It also includes descriptions of cine films, because I became obsessed with watching family cine films when I was beginning to write it seriously. And it is kind of held together or framed by the journal that I kept during the last year of my father's life. My father died of prostate cancer, and it was during the last year of his life that I began to really have to confront what I wanted to talk about with him and never quite could. And so the book is a bit of a thriller in a way. It's a sort of psychological thriller, as well as my sense of trying to find out more about myself. So I'll read, I won't write. I've done enough writing. I will read a few short sections. So there's actually very little in the book that describes explicitly the abuse. It's much more about the effects of the abuse, but obviously in places I do describe it. I'm not going to read one of those, but I am going to read a section that comes directly after it when I'm talking about the feeling of having had to keep so many secrets. Secrets. Hard, heavy things that have long been packed carefully in layers of silence. The secrets have become more and more closed, the wrapping more minutely folded and sealed. At first, and for years, the silence was wrapped so tight around the secrets that they couldn't be seen or heard at all, not by me, and certainly not by anyone else. This silence enclosing the secrets used to be my resting place, blank and calm and numb and knowing no words, simply being. It was much later that I realised that each locked away secret held a lost part of myself. Imagine a piece of music with gaps in the melody where the notes have been rubbed out. I wanted to collect the missing notes. Every time I managed to access a bad memory, I found a part of myself and I could retrieve it. Together, the notes of the secrets joined up into music I wanted to hear. Music I could hear quite clearly. Full of pain and full of beauty and strangeness, this music surprises and compels me. And the remaining silences, the gaps and missing notes that can never be found, these are part of the music. Instead of imagining my life as a scatter of separate bits and pieces, I can summon the notes and the gaps and begin to see how they link together. I no longer want to listen to the music by myself in my head. I want to sing that music out loud. It's strange and terrible, but it's real and true. 20th of April 2009. I've waited a long time for my father. I'm still waiting for him to come back to me. Most of all, in this spring space near the end of his life, I'm waiting for him to say things. I want him to admit what he did to me. I want to understand how and why as much as I can before he dies. I'm having panic attacks in the night, most nights, and dreams that repeat. I find myself in locked sunlit rooms with white sheets at the windows. So quiet, these rooms, and with a special quality of emptiness that holds the fact that they've been full of people. But my family's gone, all gone, and I feel free and alone, but locked in. When I fall asleep again, I find myself in another such room, always sensing my family has just left. Bright sunlight, the door locked. My fear is of being annihilated by and in his death. I have been, still am, so bound to him. I try to be in the dream room without worrying about working it out. I try to be there, safe and sunlit, with the voices retreating down the passage and the white sheets at the window.
Thank you so much. And one of the things I noticed when I was reading the book is that there is this kind of terrifically huge scope of time, which I was saying earlier when we were talking. There's so many of the narratives that we see about people who've been through sexual abuse are interested in kind of what happened and then the 6 months after if there's a trial. But this book has incredible layers of, over the course of the interviews, you also go back to your father's childhood, and then there's your present in there as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that patchworking and layering process, and also the time that it took to write, because yeah, as you said, it was an entire lifetime almost.
Yeah, I think what started it was that I started having to write in patches about certain things that were recurring to me as kind of memories that surfaced. And when I was doing that, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was literally just writing down what came into my mind, or what came up in dreams, or what came. And so I started off having a few patches of writing in files which I kept. And occasionally I would go back to them, and then I would go away and do something else, and then I would write another few of these patches. And it was a while before I saw that there was any kind of pattern there at all. And years went by when I kind of stood back from it and didn't really understand what was going on or what it needed to be. And then I started to look at these family cine films as well, and write from the films, because it's in some way carried me into the child that I was looking at, the child me in the films, and that gave me a certain different perspective on things. And that led to me using 3 points of view in the book as well, because I write quite a lot of it in the first person, but I also write in the third person when I'm looking at the films or from the films, because I feel distanced from that child. And then for these sections, the few sections there are describing the abusive episodes, I write in the second person, because that feels or felt more real to me, to be able to kind of create that discomfort also in the reader. So all of these kind of bits of writing started just kind of floating around, and that's how the layering started. And it was a long, long time before I knew how I could make something out of all these bits. Then I often keep journals when I'm under real pressure, and because I was under huge pressure, and in the last year of my father's life, looking after him partly too, I kept a journal, and I wrote almost every day what was happening and what it was bringing up for me. And finally the penny dropped, and I thought, okay, I can use this journal as well. I gave myself permission to use the material, which was very current and very contemporary. And when that happened, I could see that I could then start to weave that with the pieces which were based more on the past. And it was a very, very glacially slow process.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a really incredible book, which I sort of picked up, was slightly trepidatious of reading, put down, and then read, I think, completely in about 12 hours, and then read again. Yeah, you do really, for something that's so kind of patched together, it's a beautifully textured whole. Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to move on to this side. So Madeline, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your book and your life and what you do now.
This one's on. This is on? Or do
I think you need to put.
Oh, this is on? Yeah. So my book Unbroken is my memoir, and it tells my story of being gang raped when I was just 13 years old by 2 American teenagers, and it really follows my journey of survival, healing, forgiveness, transformation, and hope. And I feel a bit of a fraud because I never wanted to write at all. I've never felt that in my blood at all. I don't have an English O-level, so hey, if I can do it, anyone can do it. But I'm going to read the chapter that I read is very, very near to the end, the second last chapter, and it kind of leads up to how I decided to write. And once I made that decision to write, it really was if my story was just ready to be told, because it was literally just poured out of me. And in about 3 months, I had 8 weeks, I had written it. It was just done. Or just literally, I just felt like I was the typewriter and my fingers were like these mad automatic fingers and I couldn't stop. And my editor, my friend Joe, who lives in America, said, you know, if you get writer's block, let me know. And I said, actually, it's the opposite. I can't sleep. All I see is all these words flying around and the chapter titles. And I just would sit down the next day and it just poured out. So
That definitely sounds like you're a writer.
no, okay, so I'm going to read you a chapter called Meeting Marion, which is my second last chapter. I discovered that the Forgiveness Project also held public talks, which they referred to as conversations, featuring the actual storytellers themselves. They conducted as a way to help create awareness and education, using real stories to encourage the audience to not only consider different options other than hate and revenge, but also to see with their own eyes what's possible. Unfortunately for me, most of the conversations took place in London, and that was not an easy trek to make during the week for a working wife and a mum from Glasgow. However, I noticed it was one scheduled in Edinburgh in a few months' time, so I contacted Marina Cantacuzino to get a ticket and to arrange a meeting with her after the event. We hadn't actually met yet in person. She told me that Marion Partington, a storyteller, was due to be speaking at a school in Glasgow the next month. Perfect. The school was about 5 minutes away from my house, and I couldn't wait to meet Marion and hear her story. Marina told me this wasn't a public event. Marion would be speaking to school pupils during the day and then to an invited audience, mainly from multi-faith groups in the evening. But I managed to get a ticket from the organiser and I let Marion know I would be there. I felt a bit nervous, but mainly excited to meet someone else from the organisation. When I gave my name at the door, I saw that they had written the Forgiveness Project alongside my name as the organisation I was with, which gave me an unexpected sense of pride and belonging. One of the pupils from the schools escorted me upstairs and chatted with me along the way. She asked me what I did for the organisation, and I explained that my story had just gone up on the website recently. Then she asked me my name and stopped right in her tracks when I told her. She looked at me and told me that she was studying forgiveness in her modern studies class. She had read my story and hadn't stopped thinking about it since. She revealed that she felt lucky because she had put herself in a very similar situation when she was younger, but that nothing had happened to her. I felt amazed that this young woman was able to open up to me only because she had read my story. I couldn't imagine that it would have happened otherwise. I went into the hall, picked up a glass of juice. It's quite hard to do. I turn the page and okay. And went to look at the exhibition on display called The F Word. It had been created from a collection of stories and photos from the Forgiveness Project website. I knew it had been taken around the world and I wanted to see it for myself. I found it powerful and thought-provoking. As I walked around the exhibition, I met a teacher that I knew from my children's primary school. She told me she had recently read my story on the website and that it had affected her too. She went on to tell me of her surprise. She would never have suspected what I had been through given the way I am. It was a genuine and touching compliment. I recognised Marion from the photo and went over to introduce myself to her. She greeted me with a lovely warm hug. She was on a tight schedule and had to keep moving, so we arranged to meet up at the end of the evening. We were called to take our seats, and after some introductions, Marion started to speak. I knew that her sister was Lucy Partington, who had been abducted and murdered by Fred and Rosemary West in the early 70s, but it was very different to hear the story being spoken out loud. The whole room was mesmerised by her. I understood intimately all the different stages she had been through on her journey and identified with them all too. Fear, grief, denial, rage, and eventually peace with forgiveness. She saw that she could either sink into the depths of despair and remain closed off to the world, or face what had happened to Lucy with an open heart. She understood that she had a choice. Marion talked about the work she did as a storyteller in schools and prisons, and the impact the story had on the people who listened to it, giving them a chance to find their humanity for themselves. She had written to Rosemary West in prison, saying she recognised that Rosemary was a victim too. Rosemary had been sexually abused by her father and brother. She was also abducted and raped at the age of 15. Her father continued to rape her as an adult and even raped one of her daughters. Rosemary never responded to her letters. She also spoke of making contact with one of their daughters, herself a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of Fred and Rosemary, and how she'd written to Fred's brother, who had replied, saying he hoped something good could come out of all of this. Finally, she ended her talk with a Chinese saying that has stayed with me. He who does not forgive digs two graves. The attendees were invited to break up into smaller groups to answer questions that had been prepared by the Forgiveness Project, to promote discussion and further understanding. I recognised one of the women in the group from my synagogue. She asked who I was there with, and I told her that I was one of the stories from the website. Everyone in my small group encouraged me to tell them my story, and when I did, I witnessed a range of emotions from them. Some were angered, others weren't sure that they could have forgiven in the way I had, but all were touched by my journey. The woman I knew told the group that I had a beautiful family, and that she, like the teacher from my girls' school, would have never have guessed what was hidden behind my smiles. I didn't think my journey was so extraordinary, but the more I opened up to people, the more evidence I received to show me that it was. I knew that a lot of people could get stuck, getting caught in their rage and hate, but I hadn't. I was learning that my determination to be identified as more than a victim of rape and to make my best revenge plan a reality had worked better than I had allowed myself to see. Marion's compassion and understanding shone through as she spoke that night, and I was amazed by how she could speak so calmly and eloquently about it all. But it also encouraged and motivated me to find my voice as well, and I made a decision while she spoke that I would use my story to motivate and inspire people in much the same way. Sharing my story wasn't about helping me anymore, it was about helping others. I realised too why I love being part of this organisation. All of our journeys had led us to drop into our hearts and embrace a greater understanding and compassion for the human predicament. We are all born innocent, but with time we are exposed to so many environmental conditions that shape and influence us, such as parents, friends, schoolmates, gangs, films, music, television, countless other sources of violence and abuse in our societies. For too many people, constant exposure to violence would lead them to believe it's an acceptable form of action. At the end of the evening, I went up to speak to Marion again and told her how much her story had resonated with me. I shared with her that I could so easily have been murdered that night, just like her sister Lucy, and was so grateful that I hadn't. It was like sitting with an old friend, and I wish I could have spent more time with her. There was so much peace and calmness emanating from her that it was hard not to be moved by her presence. We said goodbye, hugged again, and I asked her to sign my copy of her book, If You Sit Very Still. She simply wrote, "Now you must speak."
Thank you. And I'm not sure if you know this, but the first time I heard you speak was at the Forgiveness Project event, actually. Yeah, about, it must be more than a year ago now.
Yeah, in the summer.
Yeah, it was warm.
Very warm.
But I'm really interested in your work with the Forgiveness Project and in, this has been something that's been running through my head a lot recently with a certain Supreme Court judge being appointed and the kind of travesty of the thong thing in Ireland. We're seeing these really real failures in the justice system, which have always been there to kind of deliver any kind of resolution for people who have been through abuse and violence. And I wanted to ask you whether, is there a role for writing a book to play in some kind of alternative? I mean, can it be justice? Can it be some kind of resolution? Is that?
I don't know if writing my book is about justice, because I never spoke about it. It took me 3 years to find my voice. I never charged them. But I have to say that forgiveness, I'm not saying that everybody has to forgive in order to heal. You can heal without forgiving, and I was an accidental forgiver. I never intended to forgive. It was when my eldest daughter, I very nearly didn't have children, but I have 3 gorgeous girls now, I reversed my decision. When Anna turned 13, all my memories returned, and I went back to therapy, and near to the end of another 3 years of therapy, my therapist suggested, maybe they weren't born rapists, and I was like, how dare he say that to me? But, he planted a seed in my head, and I just wanted to understand. I found myself really wanting to understand, well, what had they seen or heard or experienced? Because I do believe, people can argue, that we are born the same. My friend Anne, who is my manager where I work in the counselling centre, used to be a midwife, and she told me that she has delivered thousands of babies, and she's never once met any baby. And that just stayed with me, and I was really interested, and I realised when they were dehumanising me, they're really dehumanising themselves, that they were cut off from their goodness and their source, and somehow, I don't know where, I felt compassion towards these two young men, because I mentioned very briefly I came up with this plan which I call my best revenge, which was just determined to live my life as well as I could. And I know how it leaked out of me for years before I could find my voice and get help and therapies. And I think it will affect them in some way, whether they're conscious of that or not, it will leak out of them. So I don't know if forgiveness is about justice, because you do need to be sentenced and go to prison. And I know that crimes aren't going down, and we're not getting any more conviction rates. The percentage in Scotland is awful, which is where I live. And we also have 3 possible outcomes, and we're now campaigning to try and end one of them, because we have guilty, not guilty, and not guilty, and non-proven. So to me, non-proven is like, you did it, but we just can't prove it.
Yeah, and there's some concerns in there that having that third option makes juries less likely to convict when they, when they can, because it's bad. Yeah, thank you.
That answered your question.
Well, it did. I think it did. I think there's this really, there's the way we interact with these systems, and the thing you talked about, the best revenge, which is something that occurs throughout the memoir. That taking back of agency, and I guess the book is part of that, but the work you're doing is also part of that, and the rest of your life becomes part of that as well.
Because I've now found myself a speaker, which I never intended to do as well. So after not speaking for years, this is what I now do. I now share my story, and I've felt every time I speak, I know here in this audience, there will be people that have been affected by rape and sexual abuse. Every time I speak, somebody will share their story with me. And that motivates me, so I won't be silent anymore.
And Louise, hi.
You better take that.
Oh yeah. Right, classic. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes, sorry.
Or about yourself, or both.
Right, okay, I suppose the two are the same in a way. So although Maria in the Moon was my third book to be released, it was actually the first one that I wrote. And I wrote it during a really traumatic time about 11 years ago. We'd been flooded, we'd lost our house, we'd lost our belongings, we'd lost our car. My daughter was very ill and I'd given work up, she had almost died. And she was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So I was living in this horrendous rented accommodation that we managed to get. My daughter was very ill and we were kind of getting over that. And I'd always written something, whether it was diary, whether it was poems, but I'd never written a novel. And I sat down at the computer and, a bit like the way Madeline describes, these words just poured out of me. And it felt like it was fiction. And it is fiction, it actually is fiction. And I wrote the whole story of a character who came to me called Catherine Maria. And Kath Maria is a very promiscuous, very sweary, almost dislikable character, although I loved her. She's hard to like. And she has been flooded. And she volunteers at a place called Flood Crisis, which is a bit like the Samaritans, except it's for people who've been flooded. And while she's there, some memories from her past begin to surface due to all the traumatic calls that she takes. And so I asked my two sisters if they would read this book, saying this fictional book that I've written. And one of my sisters said to me, "You do realise that's not fiction, Louise?" I said, "It is, it's Catherine Maria." And they said, "Think about it, this girl was flooded, she used to be promiscuous, she swears a lot, she's sometimes dislikable." My sisters can say that to me, that's fine. And she's got all these horrendous past memories that she hasn't remembered yet. Oh, and also volunteering at Samaritans, I did that as well. And I thought, yeah, I guess it is a little bit of me in this character. A little. But Catherine Maria is ahead of me, because in the book, Catherine Maria remembers this horrendous child abuse that she went through. And when I actually wrote the one chapter that's written from a 9-year-old's perspective, a bit similar to the 11-year-old's perspective, after I'd written that chapter, which took me one full traumatic day, I actually couldn't remember what I'd written until I read it the next day. And a lot of people said to me, "Does that come from a true place?" And I actually can't answer that question, because I'm on sort of a further back road, you could say, than some of the guys here, where I don't remember what happened to me as a child, but I know something did. Now, that makes you sometimes feel fraudulent, like, how can I sit here and say this? How can you say something happened to you if you don't remember it? But I often think the body knows sometimes what the mind doesn't know, and the heart knows what the mind can't remember. So I guess, although it's fiction, it is inspired by truth, but I don't know how much of it is truth, if that makes sense. So the segment I'm going to read for you is actually a segment I've never read, because I don't usually read this because I don't kind of want to ruin further along in the novel, but I think it's a fitting piece for tonight. And it's just a page. And it's Catherine Maria's, one of her memories, and it's written in a 9-year-old's voice. Sorry, she's telling me off because I've bent the page.
There are two kinds of readers.
I've even drawn on it, look. In the shed, Uncle Henry puts his scratchy face near my ear and he blows into it. I laugh because it must be a game, but it's one that I've never played, and I'm not sure what I have to do. Leaning into the cage, I touch Geraldine, but he says, we can have more fun. Just us. And then he whispers to me, if you tell anyone about this game, they won't believe you because it's in your head, Catherine. Listen to me, Tiger. Listen to me. It's in your head. This special thing we'll do, it's magical, and it's all up here. And no one will believe you anyway. And then he taps his head and I can hear his black thoughts moving around. I want my name back. Tiger isn't my name. Neither is plain Catherine. Tiger isn't in the sky. Catherine isn't in the sky. Catherine Maria is in the sky. I think about the sky when he puts his hairy mouth on mine. He doesn't kiss me like Uncle Martin does or like my dad used to. He doesn't just brush my lips with his. He holds my face and he pulls my hair and he pushes my mouth open with his, and then he puts his tongue in my mouth. It's hot and wet and I don't like it. I squirm and wriggle like Geraldine does in any hands but mine, and he stops and he tells me I'll get used to it. If your dad was still here, it's what he would do with you. I shouted the first time he said that. I said, no, 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 my dad would never make me hurt. But Uncle Henry said it's time to grow up, that I'm a big girl. He shushes me with his finger now, but he doesn't need to. I'm used to it. I don't argue. I am a big girl. He bought me a rabbit and it's all in my head. I think about the sky and about being in the moon, and when he kisses me and he puts his hands inside my dress, and I don't know what it's called, but I don't like it.
So I whisper in my head, Maria in the moon, Maria in the moon, Maria in the moon.
That's why I've never read that before.
Thank you. Thank you both. That was, yeah. It's an incredible book, and she's an incredible character as well. I was really excited when I was reading it, mostly because she is a bit sweary, and she's actually not that promiscuous. I mean,
Not as much as I was, actually.
I mean, either, frankly. But you know, she has some spiky edges, and she isn't kind of this paragon of you know, virtue. Who, you know, she's a difficult child as well, in a very difficult family, and I thought that was so important because, like we talked about on the first panel, there is so often this idea that in order for your experience to be real, you have to be kind of whiter than white and completely infallible. And she's going through this process really imperfectly, and she's not, you know, she's not a paragon. She's not an inspirational story. She's not, you know, she's not going to be reduced to an Instagram post. And I wonder how how you went about discovering those aspects and whether you had any trepidation about putting them in, or was she always?
I think it helps that I was really angry when I wrote the book, and I think that comes through. And when I finished the book, which a bit like Madeline, I wrote it in literally 2 or 3 months, really, really fast. I put it away for a while because it drained me, and I didn't really want to read it again straight away. And when I eventually did read it, I just thought, gosh, the person that wrote that was angry. Gosh, this is raw. And gosh, she's dislikable. And I mean, I could have edited it and made her a little bit less that way. And I did think about it. And I thought, no, I think I'd rather leave her that way. And then when I eventually got the book deal, because this was the 3rd book that came out, and when my publisher read it, I wondered if she would maybe contact me and say, do you know what, Louise, we need to edit this girl because no one's going to like her, no one's going to read this, no one's going to buy it. But she didn't do that. She didn't. She said, because although it's raw and painful, there are poetic elements in it. And she said, the raw parts are what people might identify with the most if they do read it. You know, why should we pretty something up that's really ugly? And I mean, what happened to her? It's ugly. And I suppose that's the reality of it.
Yeah. I think absolutely, and she's you know, we keep talking about her as like a, you know, like you're going to get the impression that she's an awful person. She's also an incredibly compassionate person through her work on flood crisis.
For goodness sake. I keep forgetting that. She is like the lady that said that there are no evil babies. It's what's happened to her that's made her the way she is. And I think if what happened hadn't happened, she would have been a much more stable, less promiscuous and sweary individual. Do you know what I mean? I think life made her what she is. But by the end, I think she's on the healing road. And I like to think now, people sometimes ask me, where do I think she is now? And I'd like to think she's in a really good place now, and she's met somebody and she's maybe had children and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, that makes me so happy.